Hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear me okay. Welcome to the, I believe, second 2025 edition of our monthly Look Ahead webinar. This month is a little special because we are focusing on the just out 2025 work program. So this is a special one, and it's packed full of interesting strategic level content for you. So I'm going to run through the intros as quickly as possible so that we can dig right in. But once again, thank you for making the time today. My name is Michel. I'm the founder and co-founder of Lanzcape, which is a monitoring and advocacy advice app, which I hope you will check out our website afterwards if you haven't done that already. And I'm going to move right into introducing our two speakers today, the same speakers each month, Alan and Paul of the company AdvocacyStrategy, which is, again, a fairly new company and a new type of public affairs consultancy in Brussels. I invite you to look at AdvocacyStrategy's website as well. It's a fascinating new departure in public affairs consultancy. So with that, I think I'm going to hand over and move to the first slide so that we can jump right in to what we are looking at this month, which is once again the newly published work program. Paul or Alan?
It's Paul. Thank you very much, Michelle. So yes, we have a lot to talk about today, and I'm going to take you first through a little bit the top line of the work program, its structure, and then I'll hand over to Alan, who will talk about the different advice we can offer you relating to how to address your issue being in the work program in the first half of this year, the second half of this year, as well as what to do if it is not in the work program. And we'll sum up a little bit around those areas. So that's a little bit how we structured ourselves today. Let me just move forward. So indeed, we're going to talk about the work program for 2025. And as you know, it's very much focused on simplification and reflects very much our current times in the European Union and the last years as well, which have really led the President of the European Commission to focus very much on competitiveness, new technologies, AI, food security is also a big theme, as well as defense and security. So we'll see these different themes coming across from the priorities of the new Commission into the work program for the coming year. A very brief reminder of what we talked about in the last weeks. Well, fundamentally, we've just been waiting patiently for this work program to come out. It's been a little bit delayed, and we've been watching, of course, the elections come to a close, the new institutions and the new actors come into position, as well as the transition from the Hungarian to the Polish presidency. That time has been spent thinking about mapping the new actors, looking at the new teams, and getting really ready to engage now. And engage indeed on a great number of issues when we thought that the previous agenda of the European Commission was already very much ambitious and resulted in a great deal of legislation being adopted, as well as quite a lot of legislation being carried over into this new term. We will see that the ambition is certainly not faded in the current period. So we're going to look at the three pillars of the current work program. But before we do that, we're going to talk about some of the enablers. So these are actually actions that the European Commission is tabling with a specific objective of boosting competitiveness. And these are horizontal frameworks seeking to really address some of the key challenges that we have in implementing this new work program. So like I mentioned, there's a strong emphasis on competitiveness, on simplification, on streamlining, and the omnibus is in particular a very key element of this. Because this omnibus is the first of a package of proposals which will look at simplification and definition. In this case, it's going to be looking at mid-caps and looking at finance and supporting this startup and scale-up strategy, as well as promoting investment in biotech and quantum, themes that we're going to see come up again and again across the work program for this year. And the enablers are also supported by a communication on the implementation simplification, which is looking again at administrative burdens and simplifying rules and efficiency. So while we've seen the European Commission generating a lot of legislation in the last years, we're now seeing one of these regular resets where the institutions are looking to reevaluate and to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the legislation that we have adopted. So while I said we're not going to go into each of the pieces of legislation that are within the enabling actions as well as the pillars, we will highlight a few and talk a little bit about where they sit within the overall structure, which will give us a bit more time then to think about the advice that we can give you in relation to engaging with the institutions, depending upon where your issues sit within the work program for the coming year. So moving on to the next slide. So the first pillar is all about and actually it's one of three pillars. So the three pillars are competitiveness and innovation, sustainable industry and energy, and security and resilience. Competitiveness and innovation being the first pillar is really supported also by these enabling actions that seek to smooth the implementation. So the objective here is very much about promoting technological leadership, removing barriers to business. And what we've seen, of course, is this dual dialogue about the competitiveness of small businesses, startups, ensuring better access to finance, reducing regulatory burdens. And on the other hand, there's strong emphasis on technology, particularly the AI and the data union, seeking to redress the European Union's perceived delay in development in these technologies, as well as driving forward, such as in the quantum strategy, driving forward the European Union's technologies around quantum computing and communication. So there are a range of interesting initiatives here sitting around this innovation and technology and promoting small business innovation as well. Looking at the second pillar, here we're looking very much at sustainable industry and energy. So that is the title of the pillar. It's about driving affordable energy, dealing with the energy crisis that has emerged in the last year, and trying to address the lack of competitiveness of some of European industries while maintaining this energy independence. So here again, we see a whole set of packages of legislation, whether that's around the Clean Industrial Deal, Affordable Energy Plan, which is seeking to boost investments in clean tech, green energy, green industries, making energy more affordable, a major theme, of course, that has risen as a result of the conflict that we've seen on Europe's borders. And we, of course, have a strategic dialogue on the European automotive industry, which we can see about addressing these challenges that the industry has been presenting around the transition from combustion engines to e-vehicles. So there are a set of measures here addressing the automotive industry. We're looking at reviewing the CBAM. We're looking at the Circular Economy Act. And like I mentioned before, we're looking also at the Clean Industrial Deal. The third pillar is about security and resilience. So again, we're looking at not just security and defense, which we see there, but also some of the key climate challenges that result from the climate crisis, whether that is, of course, access in particular to water resilience resulting from climate change in particular. So we see some key initiatives here as well around defense, of course, setting a stronger vision for Europe's defense and cooperation. We have measures looking at crisis response, energy preparedness. We also have, like I mentioned, the very important water resilience strategy, looking at water management and infrastructure resilience. So you see the timings, of course, in these three pillars, and we'll come to that in a minute after just talking briefly about this competitiveness compass, which is something that has been published a few weeks back in late January and really stems from Draghi's report on competitiveness. Here again, we see a series of initiatives, and the tool here of the competitiveness compass is really looking to measure and guide Europe's economic performance. So looking to strengthen competitiveness, resilience, innovation, and sustainability. And we see, of course, looking at this, that it is really heavily loaded in the first quarter of this year, with a lot of ambition here around, again, some of those themes that I just mentioned around AI technologies, the Clean Industrial Deal, and of course looking at the preparedness of the European Union, as well as the omnibus on simplification. So a lot of these elements there. And the competitiveness compass has 4 key dimensions. So we're talking here about promoting investment and financing, capital into AI, biotech, clean energy. We're looking at cutting red tape, simplifying bureaucracy, leading back to the omnibus, of course. We're looking at focusing on education, reskilling. There are significant sums being talked about being allocated to reskilling. And of course, open and fair trade, a theme that has become particularly relevant in the last weeks and months with the Trump presidency coming into full swing. So the last 3 slides here, we want to break it down into legislative initiatives, non-legislative initiatives, as well as evaluations and fitness checks. So 3 different components and 3 of the different tools that the European Commission is able to draw from in its toolkit to drive forward its priorities. And here, indeed, with the legislative, we see that there is a great deal of ambition. There's a lot of legislation coming up, whether that's the Critical Medicines Act or simplification of the Common Agricultural Policy in Q2. And here, very much, these are laws and revisions to existing legislation. They'll go, of course, through the ordinary legislative procedure. And we'll see, of course, a real spike in workload. And this will come back to the advice, I think, that Alan will give us and give you about how to deal with these 2 big moments here in Q2 and Q4, where we'll see a great deal of legislation and what actions you can take now, looking at that drafting phase in the Commission, as well as the legislative phase that will come into swing, and how you can be well prepared to tackle all of this new legislation, in addition to the implementing of the legislation adopted in the last mandate, as well as the legislation that has been carried over. So there's a great deal to be dealt with by the institutions, and a lot of pressure will be on them to work through this legislative workload. So again, here, indeed, a lot of strategic policy documents, action plans, recommendations, communications, white papers, not binding legislation, non-legislative work here, setting forward the visions and frameworks, discussing strategies, building consensus, building the ground for a lot of future policies that will be developed. So there's a lot of agenda setting work here, a lot of opportunity here for you to frame and to shape the perception of some of these key issues we've discussed that come out of the priorities of the Commission, focusing on competitiveness, on technology, on security, resilience. And we see, of course, here a great deal of activity taking place in the first and second quarter of the year with, like I mentioned, we see a lot of key issues being addressed, whether it's defense, AI factories, competitiveness compass, clean industrial deal, just to name a few of them. So here again, you have to be prepared in your strategy, and I think we'll draw some advice here as well about how to approach dealing with these non-legislative initiatives and how to engage with them and how to prioritize them in relation to the legislation itself. Finally, I just want to mention, of course, that with all of this legislation that has been already adopted, and as part of an ongoing cycle of revision and evaluation, as you know, all legislation that has been adopted is pre-programmed to be evaluated and checked and revised. And of course, this drive now for reducing the red tape and the administrative burden, as well as improving competitiveness, providing a strong impetus on the European Commission to look at evaluation and fitness checks. And these are reviews, of course, of different policies, legislation, directives, regulations to assess their effectiveness, coherence and value. And an opportunity here, of course, an excellent opportunity here to provide that feedback information back into the European institutions and the Commission in particular in preparation for the idea to repeal, to simplify, to recast legislation, whether that, of course, will be an opportunity for you to address elements that have not been included, or of course provide that feedback about the success and the effectiveness of that legislation achieving its goals. Here again, there's a lot of activity here. Depending upon which sector you represent, there will be most probably one or more elements. I myself noticed that there was, of course, the fitness check on energy security architecture, a very, very key issue now, once again, with the concerns, whether that's in the Baltic, whether that's the concerns about energy prices in Scandinavia being high at the moment, whether that's about resilience to in relation to the war, of course, in the Ukraine. We have, for example, also an asylum and migration evaluation and looking at the effectiveness of the framework during the last 6-year period, and looking, of course, at reform and improvements there. And that's all happening in the first 2 quarters. And then we have public procurement issues coming up in the 3rd quarter. In the 4th quarter, we have looking at the digital policy area, which I think will be quite a significant opportunity when you combine that then with the activities around quantum computing and AI and boosting competitiveness and investment, of course, into these technologies in the coming year. So that's a little bit my race through the work program. And of course, we will share these slides with you so you can go through this and look at it yourself, reflect on this in relation to the issues that matter to you and your organization. It's an opportunity for you, of course, to reprioritize, to look at what you have as priorities in the last mandate, and look at the issues that you are focusing on and how they are represented in the coming year, as well as, of course, what to do if they are not. So without going on to that topic too much, I think I'll hand over to Alan, and I hope I was quick enough.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much, Paul. And yes, a very good overview for everybody of what has just been delivered in the work programme. And yes, indeed, good afternoon, everybody. You have been waiting for this work programme for some time now. And as Paul has outlined, I'm pretty sure you are not disappointed. Why are you not disappointed? Well, you're not disappointed because there are 20 legislative acts coming this year. There are 34 non-legislative vehicles coming, and there are 33 evaluations. And in addition to what is the usual annual run of about 1,000 implementing acts and about 200 delegated acts. So if ever there was a moment where you feel like you're moving from 1st gear to 5th gear in the space of about 3 or 4 minutes, it really is now. So we've moved up into high speed. There's a lot happening, and there's a lot of different things. And I think the breakdown that Paul gave you between legislation, sort of non-legislative initiatives, and then the evaluations and fitness checks is extremely important, because those are 3 different categories of activities for this year. So, for example, legislation is going to be much more direct, much more detailed, much more impactful for the specific sectors that it targets. A lot of the non-legislative issues where you have more strategies, dialogues, roadmaps, these things that Europe is extremely good at, they are, of course, much broader. And they touch a lot of industries, a lot of actors. They're much higher level. They're setting the scene for the future. So that's, of course, somewhat different to then also then having an evaluation or a fitness check of existing legislation with a likely need to update and review in the future. And I think it's good that Paul puts them in that frame for you, because it's extremely important to consider them differently. And we'll go on to a little bit as to why that is so important in the next few slides. Now, first of all, okay, apart from probably a healthy dose of panic right now, what do you do when you have got this avalanche that has just hit you? And I think I would start by saying there is probably 2 things that you need to be thinking of doing in the immediate term. The first is all of the internal work you need to do in your organization. And the second is the beginnings of the external work. Now, of course, the sequence here is pretty clear. You can be planning for the external, but until you know what you want and what you need internally, you can't really do very much externally other than gather more information. And maybe that is a first point, actually. The first thing you need to do once you've established a little bit what this means for you is make sure that you have got your fundamentals in place. You are going to not want to waste any time this year if you're going to navigate this hundreds of different legislative, non-legislative evaluation and implementing and delegated acts. If you want to manage this effectively, you need to get the basics right. You need to have the best monitoring platform possible in place. You need to have your templates and your processes behind that in place. You need to have your internal reporting mechanisms and coordination groups in place so that you can act quickly and not get locked down on the inside. So let me then perhaps start with the inside and what you should be thinking of doing right now. So the first bit, as most people do when the work program drops, we have to communicate back into our organizations. This is the work program, what it means. And I guess there's probably two parts of this, is just already starting to get a flavor of, okay, of the broadly, what did we say, 54, 87 different acts that are going to be happening out of the work program. Which ones do you think actually concern your organization? And can you put them on a timeline for the time being? So the first thing is kind of framing, this is what happened, this is the bits that are relevant for us, and this is the timeline. That's kind of step one. Step two is then actually trying to understand from all of those, and this is going to be very critical for public affairs professionals off the back of this work program, is what are your priorities? So do you have a mechanism internally in your organization to determine what your priorities are amongst all of these different items? And this is going to be probably one of the most important things that you will be doing this year. You will be prioritizing amongst the 85, 86, the specific, some more horizontal and general acts and evaluations that are going to happen. Which are the priorities for you? Before we even get to the stage of looking at what are your specific priorities within each one of them. Okay, so having some form of prioritization in place and being ready and able to do this with a pre-established internal group of stakeholders is going to be critical. The next thing that I think everybody should be thinking of from minute one and day one is evidence, is data. So the moment you're starting to look at the different files and priorities that are of interest to you, you should already be looking at, okay, how do we mobilize our data and evidence to go behind this? Because you can see that this is there's two things that are quite important here. There's a lot of things happening over quite an aggressive timetable. And given the slightly autocratic nature of the commission, its ability to put out proposals is going to be increased. It's going to be faster because there's less of a process internally that needs to be followed. So the commission can be very quick this year at putting out proposals. So you can never start too early when it is coming to gathering the data and evidence from your own organization. And then last, just to reiterate a point on the internal side, just again, the importance of having your structures, templates, and processes in place so you can basically repeat as you go through the year so that you're not constantly losing time and energy doing things that you could nicely set up for yourself at the very beginning. Okay, so that's the internal worlds that you should really be looking at, setting up and structuring to get you the information you need in terms of priorities and focus. Then when it comes to what that is going to translate into into the Brussels bubble, as it were, is of course then looking at the European Commission first. Well, the European Commission is intending, as you can see, to put some publications out of the door in Q1 and Q2, quite a lot, but the pace continues through the year. Where are your proposals flagged to come out? Because of course that's going to give you actually a very short or narrow window of opportunity to influence the Commission directly or indirectly. And one thing that is hopefully clear, or maybe some of you are aware of already, the main lever of influence in the European Commission today is in cabinet level and above. There are many instances where what we have seen before in this work program will be drafted in cabinet, no longer in services. Okay, so there is a definite political switch in the European Commission. So that means that there's going to be a lot of focus and energy around a very small number of stakeholders, which is going to make it very challenging. So again, some focus, some priorities from you, engaging the European Commission, mindful of how you do this, but making sure that you are engaged, if possible, at cabinet level. So that's the European Commission, because they are going to be looking at, therefore, trying to achieve or deliver this very ambitious schedule of legislation. So they want ideas, solutions, data, and evidence to support them to get things out of the door. When it comes to the Parliament and the Council, basically here then, of course, now I don't think you're the only people who are looking at the work programme with a great deal of excitement. I think broadly there are a large number of people in the European Parliament looking at the work programme with excitement, as now all of the political groups will be trying to work out what do they see as the priorities that they would like to have rapporteurship on. MEPs will be starting to position themselves for the files that they may be interested in. So there's a whole process to be looking at from how is the Parliament going to shape up? Which committee is this going to come to? What's the echoes of which group, potential rapporteur, and how can you now be making sure that you have a solid base of mapping all of those stakeholders and being ready to engage when it's required. Very similar with the council, of course, similar but different with the council. So similar in the sense of it's time to start preparing. Which working groups this going to go into? Are we able to identify who? And then getting ready, basically, the moment the council secretariat plans in all of the meetings around the different files. So really starting to ramp up the preparation and make it somewhat more specific. And again, then we've talked about the internal side quite extensively, as that is a huge part of the work that's required right now. So I'm not going to cover that again. And then we're going to look at some of the items if you're in or not in the work program. So basically, what we would say, if the issue is in the work program and flagged as coming out in Q1 or Q2, it basically means the drafting is extremely advanced, if not almost complete, which means there's a very narrow window of opportunity to actually get engaged and make a difference. So this is more going to be about trying to find out, make any small changes, presenting the evidence and data you've got, if that is then still relevant, or engaging at the political level to make the case that you want to make. So again, it's really high priority, high level issues only for items in the next 6 months. In that case, it's more about preparing for once the proposal comes out and how you're going to engage in the other institutions. However, if the proposal is flagged for the latter part of 2025, so from sort of almost, I would say, September onwards or the summer onwards, that of course gives there a bigger window of opportunity to influence the drafting phase and the final drafting of the Commission services and cabinet who are going to be doing this. So here you could expect that there'll be maybe the end of or a very quick version of an impact assessment. Maybe there's going to be some forms of consultation, some opportunities to formally engage alongside, of course, all of the informal opportunities to engage. For both of them, they will, of course, also then go through inter-service consultation, the ones in the next 6 months and the ones further on. So again, inter-service consultation is, of course, a great opportunity to work with other DGs, but it's often also possibly the best opportunity to find leaked versions of the documents as they come out. So again, engaging with these different groups in the European Commission to understand what their issues are, what the text is shaping up, and if there is any space and opportunity to actually make a content-based difference. And then, of course, for both, it really then is going to be making sure that you have the foundations for your engagement in the Parliament and in the Council, so you're ready to go. And I can't continue to stress this enough. The more preparation you do now, the more you will thank yourself in the months to come as things move very quickly. There's 50 things happening. It moves to the Parliament or the Council, and you've already got a basis to work from. So that is if your issue is in the work program. I guess what we don't take account of here is when we say if your issue is in the work program, that can of course be positive or negative. Maybe there's something in the work program that you want. Maybe there's something in the work program that you do not want. So there, of course, strategically how you're going to work on that may be different. But I think the one thing that you can count on, the Commission services are going to be under an extreme amount of pressure to deliver the proposals as laid out in the work program, i.e. they will not want to deviate from Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 as outlined in the document. So the Commission is on lockdown when it comes to this. However, if you're in favour or against something, your opportunities are going to naturally really move to the two other institutions. So I guess the strategic considerations, if we build a little bit from that, it's all the usual political game, as it were. So, you know, identifying some champions in the Parliament, organising your own alliances, building your echo chamber, looking at how you're going to make your voice heard, positioning yourself as an organisation into the debate, If it's the Parliament, of course, they're meeting with any of the rapporteurs, shadow rapporteurs, coordinators, so the key people that you will need to be working with. And again, the more you can plan this in advance, obviously, the better. When it comes to the council, of course, it's trying to leverage the member state influence. So again, if you have any national connections, any footprint around the EU, how do you do this? Also, perhaps looking at times at how your trade association, or if you are a trade association, how do you cover the council and the national angle? Trying to understand what coalitions are building, and making sure you have all of the information and arguments and evidence ready to go. And again, some of these files are going to be out of the door very soon. So if you can already foresee what your issues are, you need to start preparing quickly, because I think normally what people say is the moment an ordinary legislative procedure comes out, there's almost an 8 to 10 week window from it being sent to the Parliament and the Council, an 8 to 10 week window during which the main opinions of the key decision makers in those two institutions are framed. After that, it's like a funnel that constantly narrows. So the moment it gets published, we're still into quite a narrowing phase where opinions form relatively quickly, positions take shape, and then it becomes a discussion around the edges. Okay, so the windows for some of us here, if you have something flagged in Q2 that's critical to you, I think you're already in a race against the clock to understand what you want, what your priorities are, and building your evidence case ready to intervene when this happens. Okay, so those are some of the strategic considerations. But what would you do if you are in what would you do if your issue is not in the work program? So you're looking to push something, you're looking to promote something into the work program, or you've been expecting something in the work program and it's not there. Well, in that case, your attention should all turn to work program 2026. Now, oddly enough, the process for looking and developing work program 2026 usually starts in March of every year. So not only have they just published their 2025 work program, they should soon be starting looking at what they're going to follow on with in 2026. Normally, annual work programs are published around about October, November, in the sort of the State of the Union process that we will fall into again this year. So we could almost expect another work program in about 9 or 10 months' time, which again, oddly enough, is actually a relatively short window if you're trying to engage and get something pushed into that work program. So there, it's going to be about leveraging your networks, securing support from MEPs, political groups, key member states, trying to raise awareness and bring this issue into the Commission as something that needs to be addressed in urgency in 2026. So you need to target the 2026 drafting process, which, as I say, usually starts around about March as the DGs filter up their priorities upwards into the cabinet, into the SecGen, as this document then takes shape and gets finalised over the summer. Again, if you're trying to make the case as to why something should be in the work programme, you have the broad context, as Paul was outlining earlier, of things like the competitiveness, the political guidelines of the current Commission. You have a broad context into which you can try to argue your way into, or again, if indeed your issue is not in the work programme and you want to keep it out of the work programme, then again, by the same token, you still need to be working through this process. So again, a lot of things for you to be thinking about in here. So as we come to the months ahead, yes, I think in some ways one should be careful what one wishes for. Everyone's been excitedly waiting for the work programme. Now it's here, now it's out. And now, in many ways, as they would say, the fun begins. Why? Because the coming months are going to be, I would say, really rather busy. Busy internally in your organizations, be it a trade association, be this a company or an NGO, in trying to work out what is the most important things for you to focus on in that completely busy period of almost 90 proposals, all the implementing and delegated acts. What are all the things that concern you and what are your priorities before looking file by file at what is extremely important? So the coming months, I think, are going to be quite internal in making sure you know exactly what you're trying to achieve. In the outside world, the dust is now going to start settling. The machine is going to start moving. things are going to start coming out. The Parliament and the Council will start going to engaging. The presidencies are going to get busier. Agendas are going to fill up. This is going to be quite a busy time trying to pull all of this together. So again, making sure you've got all of the monitoring, the planning, the preparation in place, extremely important, and getting ready now for when you are going to be engaging, because when your issues move, the windows, the 8 to 10 weeks from a legislative proposal, or as you know, for implementing and delegated acts, the short windows, this year is going to be a year of short windows of influence. Okay, you are not going to have 6, 8, 12-month nice long periods to consider and get involved. You are going to have short, sharp windows to influence, and that will require a lot of preparation now to be ready for when it does happen. So I see we have a few questions, so we'll come back to those questions in a second. So when we think of what does this mean, what's the checklist for February for the work program, I guess then there will probably be 3 large things. I guess under assess the state of advancement, I think I could probably re-summarize this as do your internal homework now more than ever before. Get yourself ready. Secondly, prepare what you need for your legislative engagement, be that with either or any of the 3 institutions. Get ahead of the game because your windows will be short. And don't forget, in the midst of this chaos, don't forget the 2026 work program if you have an issue you want in or out, because that process is also going to kick off rather soon. So I think where we always end with Paul, and I think this is probably much more important than ever before, is the requirement to have some structure and process in how you're going to approach all of this. So as we've discussed a little bit here, from how you look at your prioritization, how you get your data, how you get your insights, to how you now do your monitoring across all of these different files, how you set up your positions, your mapping, your assets, your strategy, and remembering the strategy that would be different between legislative, non-legislative, or evaluations, because they're 3 different ways, they're 3 different vehicles. They need 3 slightly different strategies. Then looking at all of your outreach tactics, and then making sure you evaluate and measure everything. So I think that pretty much covers us off. We have a bit of a checklist as usual, but I think that covers us off for now. Maybe we could have a look if there are any questions that are relevant or pertinent. I don't know if Paul, if you've been keeping an eye, if there's anything you want to answer.
We have, can everyone hear me? We have a few questions in the chat, if that's okay, Alan.
Sure. Yes.
We've been able to answer a couple of them in the chat in parallel, but we have a super interesting question here. What is the main cause behind the political shift in the Commission to accumulate more influence than before in the cabinets? So is there an identifiable sort of reason for why this has happened?
Yes, her name is von der Leyen. That is the reason why. It's a pretty simple reason. It was already happening in the von der Leyen Commission #1, that power was moving upwards and central, and it has just simply amplified into von der Leyen 2. So it was already becoming a much more top-down machine. It is now very much a top-down machine. So the main cause is a choice of leadership style.
If I can maybe add, I think contextually as well, the Commission, in this days and age, we see that, the reasons for the Commission to legislate and mandate are exacerbated or strengthened by the geopolitical context and by maybe the institutional dynamics in the EU as well, in terms of, the weakness of the Franco-German collaboration. So the Council being not so strong in terms of driving forward the agenda and leaving a bit more room for the Commission. But of course, that's the broader context.
Great, thanks both. Super interesting. We have another question here, which is, when it comes to guidance documents or guidelines complementing a completed legislative initiative, would there be any public consultations where we could influence the non-legislative documents, guidelines/guidance?
I'm just processing that question.
Can you see it in the chat?
Yes.
Where is it?
Okay.
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, in answer to your question, across those three categories of legislative acts, non-legislative, and evaluations and fitness checks, all of them are eligible for consultation periods. So I think it's likely that most things will have built-in consultation periods. It would surprise me if they do not. If that's what you're talking about across those three categories where you have strategies and other. If you're more specifically talking about guidance documents that occasionally support legislation, I'm not sure these tend to be openly consulted on, but Paul, you might want to contradict me there. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to say, but certainly when it comes to, the translation of adopted legislation, then of course there's that whole dimension of engaging with the Commission and working with the member state representatives and comitology to get as much insight as possible into thinking around the implementation and delegated implementing acts and all guidance and measures provided by the Commission to facilitate. So indeed, I think those documents are not always so easy to access and require good relationships with the units and those within the units, as well as some key member states that might have people in their ministries or in their agencies who are favorable to your positions.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best vehicle, actually, Paul, is through the member states. The member states will be consulted on those guidance documents, maybe not industry more broadly, but definitely the member states.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from anyone in our audience? Now is your chance. You have the experts in front of you. Otherwise, I see that we are 1 minute before time. So I will take the opportunity to thank our speakers very much. Super valuable, I'm sure, for everyone. And to thank all of our attendees for taking the time to join us. And we will send you afterwards the deck and make the recording available so that you can go over any of it that you want to. There was a lot in there, so that you may want those resources after the fact, and we'll send those. And please keep a lookout on LinkedIn and in your inboxes for the invitation to next month's webinar, which will be at some point very near the beginning of March. So thanks very much again, everyone, and see you next month.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.